Welcome to our deep dive into William Nutting and his Nutstuff investment reports, from Northbreach Limited. But before we really get going, though, just a couple quick things.
Oh, sure.
First, Northbreach Limited. They actually do business as Nutstuff. And they're an appointed representative of Messels Ltd., authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority.
Right.
Second, while Nutstuff, they make every effort to make sure their info is accurate, they don't offer any warranties or take responsibility for errors.
Right.
And they might even have some skin in the game, meaning they might have financial interests in what they're discussing.
Yeah, disclosures are important. Transparency.
Oh, and one more thing. Nutstuff's communication is confidential, and the views expressed are solely Nutting's own, which might actually differ from Nutstuff's overall stance.
It's like getting a sneak peek into someone's personal playbook, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And trust me, this playbook is worth a look. Nutting is like this finance veteran who made his name by, going against the grain. He often spots opportunities that others miss, and his reports are just packed with bold predictions and contrarian bets.
Makes you wonder what he sees that others don't.
Right. And we know you like to stay ahead of the curve, so we've dug into his latest reports from March 10th, 12th, and 14th to bring you the most important takeaways.
We're talking about everything from the U.S. economy under what Nutting calls the Trump triumvirate to the potential for a UK MAGO movement.
Oh, yeah.
And yes, we'll even unpack his fascinating Thomas the Tank Engine analogy for digital assets.
Okay, so first things first. In his March 14th report, Nutting mentions that the Nutstuff portfolio is down 5% year-to-date.
Oh, wow. That's not great.
He chalks this up to, two main things. One, some of his smaller, more specialized holdings are facing what he calls liquidity issues. Essentially, it's harder to turn those investments into cash right now.
I see.
And two, he admits he's a bit overexposed to digital assets.
Which is interesting because, well, he's still a big believer in digital assets for the long haul.
Right.
But he thinks that the initial hype around some of the flashier crypto projects, think ICOs and meme coins, has kind of, overshadowed the real potential of the underlying technology.
Blockchain.
Yeah, exactly. Blockchain.
Right. He's really focused on the fundamentals. Now, zooming out to the broader market, Nutting highlights this interesting divergence in the MSCI World Index.
Okay.
You might know it better by its ticker symbol, MXWO.
Right, MXWO.
Yeah. What's fascinating is that when you strip out the U.S. using the MXWOU index, it's actually up 4% year-to-date.
Really?
But when you include the U.S., the whole index is down 10%.
That's a huge gap.
Yeah.
So is it Nutting saying that the U.S. is, done for? Or is something else going on here?
Well, he sees this as a potential sign of what he calls a regime change. He thinks that U.S. dominance in the markets might be fading. And this is where things get really interesting. Because Nutting believes that geopolitics are playing a major role in this shift. He argues that investors who ignore what's happening on the world stage are making a big mistake.
He's got a point.
Yeah.
I mean, can you really separate the markets from global events anymore?
Right.
It's all connected.
It is. He's particularly focused on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Oh, of course.
And its ripple effects on Europe. In his March 12th report, he makes this, bold claim that the war is actually accelerating Europe's decline.
Wow.
Potentially following a similar path as the UK after World War I.
He's not pulling any punches.
Yeah.
So what's his reasoning there?
Well, he doesn't hold back on his criticism of European leaders either. He compares the current sentiment in Europe to the pre-World War I era, saying it's all very emotional and out of touch with the reality on the ground.
He even brings up the Kosovo precedent, which, if you're not familiar, refers to the NATO intervention in Kosovo back in the 90s. Nutting argues that the West's current support for Ukraine's independence contradicts its actions in Kosovo, where it essentially supported a province breaking away from Serbia.
Oh.
This fuels, that whole debate about double standards in international relations.
Yeah, it's a messy situation for sure.
Yeah.
And Nutting really dives deep into his analysis of Putin's goals and how he thinks the conflict might play out. He lays out different potential outcomes and scenarios, which is, pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's like trying to piece together a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
Right.
And the picture keeps changing.
Exactly. But despite all this geopolitical turmoil, Nutting still sees investment opportunities.
Really?
He's not one to shy away from a contrarian bet. In fact, he says two of his key what-if scenarios for 2025 are already playing out.
Oh, and what are those?
The first is, what if there's peace in Ukraine? And the second is, what if China suddenly becomes investable again? He's been positioning his portfolio around these scenarios, and he seems pretty confident in his stock picks, even though they go against the grain.
I can only imagine. So where is he putting his money? What sectors is he looking at?
One area where he's particularly bullish is the UK energy sector.
Okay.
This is like a contrarian play that goes directly against the whole, net zero agenda.
I mean, you might be thinking, wait, isn't everyone moving away from fossil fuels?
Right.
But Nutting sees a huge opportunity emerging that most investors are completely missing.
He does.
He thinks the UK government's net zero push is actually creating an artificial shortage, driving up prices, and setting the stage for a potential boom in domestic oil and gas.
Right.
Think of it like a coiled spring,
Yeah.
just waiting to release.
Exactly. He believes economic success hinges on, low-cost energy.
Right.
Something he thinks the UK government is overlooking. He even cites a report from this group called Thundersaid, which predicts a major shift in North Sea oil and gas policy. They're basically saying that the UK might be forced to do a complete U-turn on its energy policies.
Oh, wow.
And he's putting his money where his mouth is. He's got this whole UK energy basket of stocks. It's a mix of high-risk and lower-risk companies, like Serica, Rebold, Diversified Energy, AJ Lucas, Pantheon, Harbor Energy, Tullow.
Oh, I know a couple of those.
And Kistos.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting mix. So he's really betting big on this sector.
Yeah.
But what about, if the market is so shaky, where else is he putting his money?
Well, he's doubling down on something most people are running away from.
What's that?
Digital assets.
Oh, interesting.
Now, remember what we said earlier. He's still a believer in the long-term potential of blockchain technology, especially in the context of Web3.
Right.
But he's, very clear-eyed about the fact that the initial hype around crypto has led to some serious capital destruction.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
It's like everyone piled into a roller coaster that promised a thrilling ride, but ended up, derailing.
Yeah, a lot of carnage on the tracks.
Right. This is where his Thomas the Tank Engine analogy comes in.
Thomas the Tank Engine.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It's a great way to, understand his thinking.
Lay it on me.
Okay, so picture, Thomas the Tank Engine, right?
I got it.
Bitcoin. That's your solid, dependable engine.
Okay.
The blockchain itself, it's reliable, it's built to last.
I see where you're going with this.
But all those early crypto projects, the ICOs and meme coins, those are like the fancy carriages. All bells and whistles, but, kept derailing.
Yeah. Crashing the whole system.
The way Nutting sees it, the future of blockchain is about building the right carriages to transport valuable, real-world assets and services using that solid, dependable engine of blockchain technology.
I see. Building on the strong foundation that's already there.
Yeah. That's where the real potential lies.
So he's not just talking about this theoretically, right? He's actually putting his money where his mouth is.
Right. He's actually invested in companies like, Bitcoin and Helium. He sees this as a time to be patient, to focus on quality projects that are building real-world solutions.
So essentially he's saying, don't get distracted by the wreckage of those derailed carriages.
Exactly.
The real journey is just beginning.
It's definitely a different way of looking at the, digital asset space.
It is. It's a long-term vision, not just chasing the next hype cycle.
So we've covered a lot of ground already, from a potential shift in global power dynamics to, some very contrarian bets.
Yeah, that's just scratching the surface.
And this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more to unpack in Nutting's reports.
I'm ready for more.
In the next part, we'll dive deeper into some of his specific investment ideas and explore his thoughts on a potential UK MAGA movement. It's going to be a wild ride.
Buckle up.
Welcome back to our deep dive into William Nutting's market analysis. Remember, we're exploring the investment landscape through the eyes of a true contrarian.
It's a fascinating perspective.
It is. In the last part, we talked about, a potential shift in global power and some of Nutting's bold bets, like his UK energy basket.
Right. Those were some big ideas.
They were. Now let's dig into some more of his specific investment ideas.
I'm all ears. What's he got his eye on?
Well, what's fascinating here is that Nutting doesn't just look at the numbers. He connects the dots between, like, global events, economic trends, and even cultural shifts.
You uncover those hidden opportunities.
Exactly, the ones that most people miss, like in his March 10th report where he talks about Tesla.
Tesla. Everyone's got an opinion on Tesla.
Right. He even like jokingly says Tesla's total addressable market is limited to, and I quote, the President of the United States, approximately 300 million Europeans and Americans who want to save their countries and families, and at max, 300 million Chinese.
He's really playing with those extreme opinions, isn't he?
Oh, he is. But then he throws in this personal anecdote that really, makes you think. He was in Vancouver and got to experience Tesla's full self-driving technology firsthand.
Oh, wow.
And he was impressed by how smoothly and accurately the system handled, like a 35-minute drive through the city and countryside.
Interesting.
This made him question whether the market is underestimating Tesla's potential in the, FSD space.
It's a good reminder that even seasoned investors like Nutting can be swayed by real-world experiences.
Right.
It's one thing to read about a technology, but quite another to actually see it in action.
Exactly. And it shows that he's willing to challenge his own assumptions and adapt his views based on, new information.
It's a refreshing quality in an industry that's often stuck in its ways.
Absolutely. Now, another sector where Nutting's contrarian views stand out is offshore drilling. In his March 12th report, he points out that the number of major players in this space has shrunk dramatically since 2014.
Okay. Less competition, I guess.
Right, and he sees this consolidation, along with some key economic factors, as a strong signal for, future returns.
So he's bullish on offshore drilling. That's pretty contrarian these days.
Oh, it is. He even highlights specific companies like Tidewater, Bore Drilling, and Valaris as potential investment opportunities.
Oh, okay. I have to look those up.
Yeah. He backs up his argument by citing the former CEO of Pioneer Natural Resources, who basically said that even the big shale companies are running out of high-quality inventory.
Interesting.
This supports Nutting's belief that the next wave of oil production will have to come from offshore sources, boosting demand for drilling services.
He's thinking ahead,
Check.
trying to anticipate where the industry is going.
He is. He also makes this interesting point about oil prices.
Okay.
He argues that $65 oil today is like $50 oil 2 decades ago if you adjust for, inflation.
Right. Got to factor in inflation.
So if oil prices were to drop back to $50, it would be the equivalent of $35 oil in the past, which could lead to a big drop in production.
A supply shock.
Exactly. It's a thought-provoking argument. He's basically saying the market might be underestimating the potential for, those supply shocks if oil prices take a significant dip.
He's always looking for those blind spots, the things that most people are missing. So we've talked about Tesla, offshore drilling.
Yeah.
What else is on his radar?
Well, let's bring it back to the UK. We talked before about his, bullish stance on the UK energy sector, but he also dives deeper into this idea of a potential UK mega movement.
UK MAGA. Okay, this should be interesting.
Remember, this is building on his view that the UK needs to ditch its net zero policies. He sees them as economic suicide, arguing that the government is prioritizing ideology over, practical economic concerns.
I can see why he calls it kamikaze.
Oh, he does. He's especially worried about the impact on the, UK energy sector, which he thinks is being choked by the net zero agenda.
It's a tough balancing act. Trying to transition to cleaner energy while also maintaining energy security and economic stability.
Right. He points out that, oil and gas are major contributors to the UK economy, supporting tons of jobs.
He's worried about those job losses.
He is. He's afraid that government policies aimed at, cutting fossil fuel production will backfire, hurting the UK economy and its workers. He also claims that the UK government's net zero obsession is blowing a massive hole in their budget.
How big are we talking?
He estimates a budget shortfall of a whopping £140 billion and suggests that even drastic measures like scrapping the NHS or slashing benefits won't be enough to fix it.
Wow. He's not mincing words. So what's his solution?
Well, a complete reversal on net zero and a shift towards, a more realistic energy policy.
One that prioritizes affordability and reliability.
Exactly. It's a controversial stance for sure, but it's an interesting counterpoint to the mainstream narrative.
It is. Now, remember that report from Thunder said? Predicting a sea change in North Sea oil and gas policy.
Yeah.
Nutting thinks both Europe and the UK will be forced to walk back their recent energy policies
Because of...
because of the link between energy and national security.
Right. So this brings us back to the UK MAGA
Let's
idea.
unpack that.
Nutting believes that the UK is at a crossroads. They can either stick with the current net zero path
Huh?
or embrace a more practical approach to, energy and economic policy. He thinks a UK MAGA movement, similar to the Make America Great Again movement in the US, could pop up as a reaction to what some see as failures of the current, political
A
establishment.
populist backlash is happening in other parts of the world.
He sees this potential movement as a pushback against, rising energy prices and the feeling that the UK has lost some of its national sovereignty.
People are feeling squeezed.
They are. And he thinks this UK MAGA movement, if it happens, could have a big impact on the investment landscape.
Also.
It could mean a shift away from those, green investments
Okay.
and a renewed focus on traditional industries like energy and manufacturing.
It would be a pretty dramatic shift.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the UK, but let's zoom back out to the global stage. Remember how Nutting believes we're seeing a shift in power dynamics?
Yeah.
He dives deeper into this idea in his March 14th report, specifically focusing on the Russia-Ukraine conflict.
Okay.
He argues that the war has, exposed some deep divisions within Europe
Uh-huh.
and is speeding up the decline of Europe's influence on the world stage.
Interesting.
He thinks European leaders have been, naive and unrealistic in their approach to the conflict, letting, emotions cloud their judgment.
He even draws parallels to the time before World War I.
Right, where similar miscalculations and misplaced idealism led to disaster. He also points out the double standards that have been on display throughout the conflict. He brings up the Kosovo precedent again, arguing that the West's current support for Ukraine contradicts its actions in the past, which fuels, accusations of hypocrisy.
He suggests that the West's focus on blaming Russia ignores the complex historical and geopolitical factors that led to this situation.
It's never that simple, is it?
Right. He argues that expanding NATO eastward, despite promises made to the contrary, created a security dilemma for Russia and helped escalate tensions.
It's like poking a bear and then being surprised when it roars.
Exactly. He thinks the West needs to have a more honest and nuanced dialogue with Russia to find a lasting solution to the conflict. He warns against, demonizing Russia and its leaders.
Because that will just make things worse.
Exactly. He also believes that the economic sanctions against Russia will probably backfire,
Oh, how so?
strengthening Russia's resolve and pushing it closer to China.
Interesting. It's like the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Right. He advocates for a more pragmatic and less ideological approach to the conflict, one that acknowledges, Russia's security concerns and looks for common ground.
It's a tough situation, for sure. No easy answers. But he makes this really important point that the war in Ukraine is distracting us from, a bigger threat,
Which is?
the rise of China. He sees China as the real geopolitical rival to the West and thinks the Ukraine conflict is diverting attention and resources away from dealing with China's growing economic and military power.
It's a sobering thought. He's basically saying, don't get so caught up in this one fight that you lose sight of the bigger picture.
Right. It's like playing checkers when you should be playing chess.
Now, shifting gears a bit, I was really intrigued by Nutting's analysis of the U.S. economy under what he calls the Trump triumvirate. It's a, bold term, but it captures his view of the Trump administration's impact on the U.S. economy.
I'm curious to hear his take on that.
He argues that the Trump administration's aggressive policies, while, disruptive in the short term, have actually revealed the weaknesses in the U.S. economy and sped up its relative decline.
He's not a fan, I take it.
Well, he specifically points to the trade wars, especially with China, as a prime example. He thinks these trade wars have hurt U.S. businesses, increased costs for consumers, and damaged America's reputation as a reliable trading partner.
It's a complex issue.
It is. He also criticizes the Trump administration's tax cuts, arguing that they mostly benefited the wealthy and corporations while doing little to boost, overall economic growth. He believes these policies have widened the gap between the rich and the poor and contributed to the growing political divide in the U.S.
It's a familiar argument.
It is. He's also concerned about the Trump administration's America First foreign policy, saying it has alienated allies and undermined U.S. global leadership.
He thinks it's a short-sighted approach.
Yeah, that will ultimately weaken the U.S.
Okay, so overall, not a very optimistic outlook on the U.S. economy.
No, not really. He paints a pretty bleak picture of the U.S. economy's future. He thinks the country is on a downward trajectory, and that the policies of the Trump triumvirate have only accelerated this decline.
It's a challenging perspective,
It is.
but it's important to consider different viewpoints.
Right.
Nutting is forcing us to think critically about the long-term health of the U.S. economy
Uh-huh.
and its place in the world. Now, remember that Thomas the Tank Engine analogy we talked about
Oh,
earlier?
I love that analogy.
It really captures Nutting's view of the digital asset space.
It does.
He believes in the power of blockchain technology,
Right.
but he's also realistic about the ups and downs of the crypto market.
It's been a roller coaster ride.
It has. He urges investors to look beyond the hype and focus on the underlying value. He thinks blockchain will revolutionize finance, but it's going to take time.
Right. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Exactly. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about, money and value.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this part. We've looked at everything from Tesla and offshore drilling to the potential for a UK MAGA movement and the future of digital assets.
It's a lot to digest.
It is. What's clear is that Nutting is not afraid to challenge conventional wisdom and make, bold predictions.
And that's what makes his analysis so compelling.
Uh-huh.
It forces us to question our assumptions
Well,
and look at the world from a different angle.
in the final part, we'll wrap things up by exploring some, key takeaways from Nutting's work and leave you with some thought-provoking questions to consider
I'm looking forward to it.
as you navigate the, ever-changing world of investing. Stay tuned.
Disclaimer. North Breach Limited, Nutstuff trading name, is an appointed representative of Messels Limited, which is authorized and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Nutstuff has made every reasonable effort to ensure the information provided in this communication is correct. But Nutstuff makes no representation nor any warranty as to whether the information is accurate, complete, or up to date. To the extent permitted by law, Nutstuff accepts no responsibility for any errors or misstatements, negligent or otherwise. Nutstuff, its associates, officers, or employees may also have interests in the financial instruments referred to in this information by acting in various roles. The information in this media is confidential. If you are not the intended recipient, you are not authorized to use the information in this media in any way. Nutstuff does not guarantee the integrity of any media or attached files. The view or opinions expressed are the author's own and may not reflect the view or opinions of Nutstuff. Electronic communications carried within the Nutstuff system may be monitored.
Welcome back to the final part of our, deep dive into William Nutting's world, where we decode the investment strategies of a true contrarian. We've covered a lot of ground, from the energy plays to the rise of China, and even that fascinating Tesla anecdote. Now let's kind of pull it all together.
What strikes me about Nutting's work is how he, weaves together these, seemingly disparate threads, geopolitics, economics, technology, into this, cohesive narrative. It's like, he's not just looking at individual trees, he's seeing the whole forest.
Exactly. And remember, he's doing this while managing his own portfolio.
Right.
Putting his money where his mouth is. So it's not just theory, it's real-world application.
Right. He's walking the walk,
Yeah.
not just talking the talk. Now, as we wrap up, I think it's important to, highlight a few key takeaways from Nutting's work.
Okay, shoot.
Firstly, Nutting stresses the importance of, a global perspective. He's constantly reminding us that investors who limit themselves to their own domestic markets are missing out on opportunities and taking on unnecessary risks. He pushes us to diversify geographically, to look beyond our borders and consider investments in places that might, feel unfamiliar.
It's like he's saying, don't be afraid to, explore the unknown. There are treasures to be found in the most unexpected corners of the world.
Secondly, and this is, a recurring theme, Nutting champions a contrarian mindset.
Yeah.
He believes that the best opportunities often lie where, most people aren't looking.
Right.
He wants us to think for ourselves, challenge conventional wisdom, and be willing to go against the crowd.
It's that whole buy when there's blood in the streets mentality,
Yeah.
right? But it takes, guts to actually do that.
Exactly. It's easy to follow the herd, but true success often comes from taking, calculated risks and seeing value where others see only danger. Now, this leads nicely into the third takeaway, which is the increasing importance of, geopolitical risk. Nutting argues that we can't ignore what's happening in the world.
Right.
These global events have, like, a ripple effect on the markets. And investors who aren't paying attention, well, they're setting themselves up for failure.
It's true.
He's urging us to stay informed, connect the dots between political events and economic trends. He's basically saying, read the news, understand the bigger picture, and use that knowledge to make, smarter investment decisions.
It's like he's saying, the world is your classroom. Don't just sit in the back row, get involved, and learn from everything around you.
And finally, Nutting emphasizes the importance of, patience and discipline. He's a firm believer in the long game. He thinks successful investing requires, a clear strategy, a steady hand, and the ability to ignore the noise and stick to your plan.
It's that whole idea of delayed gratification, right? It's not about chasing quick wins. It's about building lasting wealth, over time.
Right. It's like planting a seed and nurturing it until it grows into, a strong tree. It takes time, effort, and a bit of faith.
Okay, so those are some of the big takeaways from Nutting's work. Now, before we wrap up, let's go back to that final, thought-provoking question he posed about the UK. Remember, he believes the UK is at this crossroads, facing a choice between, sticking with the net zero path or embracing a more pragmatic approach to energy and economic policy.
And he wonders, do you believe a UK MAGA movement is possible? It's a question worth, pondering. Could we see a similar populist wave in the UK, driven by the same frustrations and anxieties that, fueled the Make America Great Again movement in the U.S.?
It's definitely a possibility, and if it happens, it could have a significant impact on the investment landscape. Not just in the UK, but, globally.
It's a reminder that the world is in constant flux. Things change, power shifts, and what seemed impossible yesterday could become, reality tomorrow. As investors, we need to be adaptable to stay ahead of the curve and to always be learning.
So as we conclude this deep dive into William Nutting's world, we want to leave you with this challenge. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and never stop seeking knowledge. The world of investing is, a fascinating, ever-evolving journey. And the more you learn, the better equipped you'll be to navigate its twists and turns and achieve your financial goals.